6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome into Pro Football Today. It's time for the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio after that Thursday night thriller. And look, anyone that had the Rams offense having a resurrection, good on you. 30-20 is how the Rams topped the Minnesota Vikings tonight, which means there's plenty for Tom and I to get into. If you missed the halftime show, Tom and I were discussing the first half of this matchup where they were tied up heading into the locker rooms, but we definitely saw a lot more fire out of that Rams offense in the second half. Not to go against what the Vikings were able to do. We saw some frustrations, a little sadness out of Justin Jefferson on the sideline there. But look, if I felt like the game was in grasp and I slowly saw it washing away from me, I'd be a little sad too. So what did you see in that second half there, Tom?
All good stuff for the Rams. I mean, they are flying around. It looks like completely different version of Matt Stafford. Obviously, we have to take this in the context of like not having the weapons around him to fully move this offense in the direction that they wanted to go. Coming out of the first week, you would think that they're ready to compete for a division title, and obviously a number of down weeks, but I want to say they're all systems go right now. Like, it is all pointing up. There's these trade rumors that Kupp could be available, Stafford could be available. They shouldn't be doing that. Like, they have a team together. As long as they can get a little bit healthier on the offensive line, defense, etc., they have a team that I think can compete for the division title. And maybe we can show those odds as the show goes on. But San Francisco dealing with a million injuries, which we'll get into. They play on Sunday night against the Cowboys. I just don't think Seattle's good enough. The Rams can compete for the division, so we got a lot to break down. I think Minnesota ultimately on the other side of things, they're going to be fine. It's a short week. They're coming off their first loss. I think they will be totally fine. They'll right the ship. Justin Jefferson's still awesome. They still have Aaron Jones. Darnold looked great. All things considered, their defense is still good despite being a little bit picked apart today. I think they're fine. They will still make the playoffs. We got a lot to talk about.
Absolutely, and I totally think they're still going to be fine, too. Look, something that did work out, one of if trends are your friends, as our dear friend Adam Kaufman likes to point out during the pregame show, well, trends were friends with what happened to a team that's coming off of a bye week, that loses after coming off of a bye week. So that expectation actually checked out to the fact of the Minnesota Vikings falling short to the Rams. But you said it, there's just a few holes here and there. It's easy cleanups that they can pull together as we continue to move through this NFL season. But most importantly, the excitement behind the Rams getting some key pieces back. You mentioned it. I mean, in the timing and getting these pieces back and getting a healthier defense, the Rams are right there to compete. The amount of holes that they have on their defense, what their injury report has looked like thus far this season, it's a lot of adversity to have to overcome to piece together a performance as such. So 30 points and Puka Nacua leading that wide receiving room. He closes out the night with 106 receiving yards through 7 receptions. It's Cooper Kupp shortly behind him with 51 receiving yards and 5 receptions. So, unfortunately, depending on what numbers you got, unless you hopped on the live lines, if I'm not mistaken, Tom, yardage-wise, it was kind of hard to lock in on Cooper Kupp, and then even reception-wise, it was hard to lock in on Cooper Kupp. But he did find the end zone, so anybody who knew that he would be a touchdown guy upon his return, good check out there. Demarcus Robinson picked up 2 tutties on the night, but only had 35 receiving yards through 2 receptions. So the way they were able to manipulate the ball, seeing that they're trying to just trend in a healthier direction, I think that you make a great point to say this team can compete out west for sure. So what else did you see out of this competition tonight between the Rams and the Vikings that kind of have you looking forward at either team?
If we could, Vinny in the back in production, if we could flash some of the graphics from the wide receivers just to give us a clear view. Cooper Kupp went under his yards, right? It was sitting at 67, I think it was. Yeah, 67 and a half. He went under on both, but he does score. Jefferson clears that his yards, he clears his total receptions, doesn't find the end zone. It is what it is. Puka Nacua's line was at 28 and a half. 28 and a half. He cleared that in the first quarter, the first or 30 yards, wherever you might have gotten it. 2.5 receptions, 30 yards. He had 7 receptions for 106 yards. I don't know who they play next week. We can get into that, but Puka Nacua's line is not going to be 28 or 30 next week. It's going to be back to that range where we should be seeing both Kupp and Nacua in the high 60s, 70s, whatever it might be, obviously depending on the matchup. But they have a little bit, extended bye or a mini bye because they're playing on Thursday. 9 targets, 8 targets for them for those two, 7 for Kyren Williams. What I spoke about heavily in the pregame show is that if these players are good to go, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, everyone else was going to see a diminished role. Demarcus Robinson, as you said, he had the 2 touchdowns, but he was the highest of the rest of them with 3 targets. That means everyone else saw only 2 or 1 target. So Colby Parkinson, Tutu Atwell, none of these players are playing a role. This is the high-level offense that we see from the Rams. It is heavy Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and then everyone else. It is such a dramatic drop-off. Now, this does give us a lot to target in the prop market because we know where the ball is going, right? The 2 touchdowns for Demarcus Robinson are great for him. It's great that they have another option in the red zone. But ultimately, we're talking about 2/3 of the offense going to 3 players, maybe even 70%. So really good stuff from the Rams.
Absolutely. And a really solid point out also because moving forward, they have the Seahawks coming up next, which, of course, we've seen the Seahawks have their fair share of games, but for the most part, defense is subpar and not to mention not fully healthy. After taking on the Seahawks, they go against the Dolphins. I think they continue to stride forward versus the Dolphins. After the Dolphins, they have the Patriots. After the Patriots, they have the Eagles. So before they even get to the Eagles, you're looking at some props that can be highly favorable in terms of those 3 specific targets because they're just going to continue to regroup that chemistry that they've had and solidify it. I mean, to put up 30 points going to mainly Puka Nacua tonight should tell you a lot moving forward, and I think it's an exciting thing that they're going to take on the Seahawks next November 3rd at 4:25 p.m. So, as Tom said, plenty to get into, plenty to review, plenty to look ahead on, probably with both sides here, as well as the Vikings, because Justin Jefferson was still Justin Jefferson. We saw some limited production when it comes to Jones on the ground. I thought that was going to be a lock-in from a banged-up defense standpoint. And then outside of that, Sam Darnold, yardage-wise, I had him for over 262.5 on the ground, as well as passing yards. Did not touch that. So, some plays went great, other plays kind of a bust, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles for some Thursday night thriller action. Don't go anywhere. Continue to hang out with Tom and myself here for Pro Football Today, the post-game show. Make sure you're following us over on X. That's at SportsGrid, as well as Tom Vecchio and myself. And then we will continue to get to this. And then we're going to look ahead to Sunday because we've got a lot of games to preview, a number of games circled on the calendar, and so much more. So don't go anywhere. Stick with us here on SportsGrid TV.
Look, Aaron Rodgers, it does seem like he really enjoys, people like us, Vinny, talking about him.
I don't know what's going on here with Aaron Rodgers. I think there's some frustration settling in, and the Jets were not supposed to be this bad of a defense, right? They've had a lot of injuries. Maybe that's the thing here. Robert Saleh's influence is there. I know they have their defensive coordinator running things, but now he's distracted.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
Did they talk about the play they ran at the end of the game when it was the worst players we've ever seen in the history of basketball? No. So here's what you got to do, Sherwood. I respect you. You're fantastic. But damn it, don't blame the officials. When you have a game like this, that close, there's about 100 or 1,000 different things you could have done differently that could have won you the game.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night, I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back into Pro Football Today. It's time for the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio, recapping this matchup between the Vikings and the Rams. Rams come out shooting 30-20. Offense comes back to life under Stafford, Cooper Kupp, but more importantly, Puka Nacua leading the charge with his connections with Stafford tonight. So the pregame show. Originally, we said we didn't really know how to gauge this game. Coming in, it was a 2.5 spread. It was sitting between 47 to 48.5 on the total. That total clearly moved during the game. But most importantly, we were trying to figure out where to gauge these props. What was the workload going to look like with Puka Nacua possibly coming back? They wanted to see how he dealt with warm-ups. If anything, they baited us to feel like Puka Nacua was going to have more of the conceptual role versus Cooper Kupp's return, and then all of a sudden it's the Puka Nacua game. Other than that, we didn't know if the ground game was going to come to life for the Rams. We overly assumed the ground game was going to be the key for the Vikings. So there were so many things, which brings us to how did these best bets shake out, Tom? What does your card look like at the end of this Thursday night?
I'm feeling great. This was a great game. We got points. It's a Thursday night. We don't often get a lot of scoring and a lot of good production on Thursday nights, but a lot of my best bets came through. Also, same game parlay from the pregame show won. So let's go through both of those real quick. Either one, if we have the same game parlay or the best bets, we can go through both of those. But for same game parlay, it was over 48.5. Now, at the time that I was talking about it, we were saying it was 47.5. So if you grabbed it there, that's great. The safety at the end of the game is what pushed this over 48.5. So I'm thankful for that. Both Adam and I spoke heavily about Matthew Stafford. This was going to be a very, very solid game for him. And then Kyren Williams, playing a big role out of the backfield. At least a decent role out of the backfield, 19 yards. So it was only plus 310. Obviously, FanDuel had some boost. You could throw a 30% boost on it to get up into the mid-4 range, which I certainly did. That's a winner. Always great to see. There's a couple SGP wins over the last few weeks, which we like. When it comes to best bets, Matt Stafford got over the passing attempts by 1 on that last pass, which is awesome. Aaron Jones went over his receiving yards, which is great to see. He did nothing in the first half, but he did have that one long catch, which put him over on just that. Kyren Williams, that was a loss. He eventually got there. They just continued to feed him the ball time and time again. And then Colby Parkinson, under 31.5. He ended with 2 catches for 17 yards again. With Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp coming back, I was expecting these secondary and tertiary players to really, really take a step back, and that's what we saw from Tutu Atwell, Colby Parkinson, Demarcus Robinson. They had a total of 3, 2, and 2. They had a total of 7 targets between 3 players. These guys were playing primary roles over the past few weeks, which is what I said during the pregame show. What we saw from the Rams over the last few weeks is not what we were going to be seeing tonight, and that played out very, very clearly. So it was an awesome day. And again, the one thing I will note, not just to pump my own tires here, but you need to pay attention to the lines. I got at 48.5, and I was pretty lucky with a safety, which is super random for it to go over. So if you're paying attention during the pregame show, you could have gotten at 47, and that last touchdown by the Rams, you were free and clear. So always important to get in at the right time.
Great point with that one. But yes, you deserve to toot your own horn here. That's why we have the pregame show, to throw all this stuff in the mix and put our best thoughts, analytics, and all that stuff on the line. And something else, we are such bad teammates because we talk about everyone talking with us over on social media, and the minute that Tom's thing hit, maybe because it was that safety, so it was really cutting it close. But we didn't give our teammate all the love online, so just know that between Dave and myself, we will make sure we get that up there. And This is the one of the few days that Dave did not choose your SGP. He leaned towards Adam's SGP, so we get to rub it in our teammates' faces a little bit later. As for that, I mean, Aaron Jones kind of crushed me on that one, and so did Sam Darnold with their yardage for the night, but I was on top of Williams hitting over. I just felt like they were going to kind of try to match the script from week 1 versus the Lions, and that's where I was only coming in angle-wise on some of the ground game potential that they had. But outside of that, that was a great card, Tom, and a lot of great calls, but you're right. Getting it in on the right time is extremely helpful, which means you guys are going to continue to hang out with us here on SportsGrid TV Pro Football Today, the post-game show, because now that we have recapped the Thursday night matchup, it's time to look ahead to Sunday and check out the Sunday slate. And this is where the spreads can kind of really matter. Tom typically walks us through the previews of the games, and depending on when you catch the spread, that can put you right there for winning some pretty big bets, or also looking at some decent lines when it comes to player props and what news we know on our end as of Thursday. So don't go anywhere. Continue to hang out with Tom Vecchio and myself here on Pro Football Today, the post-game show, as we get ready to look at the Sunday slate. Best games of the week, non-best games of the week, doesn't matter. We're running through the NFL, coming back here on the other side of this quick break.
Look, Aaron Rodgers, it does seem like he really enjoys, people like us, Vinny, talking about him.
I don't know what's going on here with Aaron Rodgers. I think there's some frustration settling in, and the Jets were not supposed to be this bad of a defense, right? They've had a lot of injuries. Maybe that's the thing here. Robert Saleh's influence is there. I know they have their defensive coordinator running things, but now he's distracted.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
Did they talk about the play they ran at the end of the game when it was the worst player screen I've ever seen in the history of basketball? No. See, here's what you got to do, Sherwood. I respect you. You're fantastic. But damn it, don't blame the officials. When you have a game like that close, there's about 100 or 1,000 different things you could have done differently that could have won you the game.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back into Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio. We recapped this Thursday night showdown between the Vikings and the Rams, and in case you missed it, Rams offense comes for the shootout, winning 30-20 over the Minnesota Vikings, delivering them second loss of the season to Minnesota. But it is time to look ahead, because after tonight, we've got a long slate of Sunday football all the way to Monday, where you will rejoin us for Pro Football Today for the pregame party. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, Tom, let's talk about some of the top games coming up on Sunday, starting with the Eagles taking on the Bengals. Spread sitting at 2.5 currently and 47.5 on the total. How are we gauging this one?
Yeah, this game's going to be awesome. And, we kind of touched on it after the post-game show on Monday night. We were talking about, what does this line tell us? Who does this tell us more about? Is it more about the Bengals? Is it more about the Eagles? we haven't seen much movement. Ultimately, I'm going to say the best spot to probably go is Joe Burrow to over 257.5 passing. But the Eagles still do have a solid run defense, and Chase Brown and Zach Moss coming in the backfield necessarily don't inspire a whole lot of confidence from me. And when push comes to shove, the Bengals are going to be passing the ball. That's what it comes down to. Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. So 257.5 for Burrow is probably my favorite spot. I don't have a favorite when it comes to deciding between Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. I think just trusting Burrow, and where the game gets out of hand and he has to play, they're playing from behind, he just has to pile up the yards. That's probably the best spot that'll go. A.J. Brown always has that deep ball threat, as we've seen over the past few weeks. He had that long touchdown against the Giants. So 75.5 yards, I think, is pretty spot on. And again, we've seen the Bengals defense struggle at times this year, especially some of these long passes. So I kind of like A.J. Brown over 75.5 yards as well.
I do like that one. And good touch on the Zach Moss thing, because there's been a number of games where they just felt like it was hard to really get him going and kind of help contribute when it comes to picking up the run game. Competition does matter, but regardless, it's going to be an air-out attack for the Bengals, in my personal opinion. Pivoting over to the Green Bay Packers versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. 3.5 spread, 49.5 on the total. What do we see with this one? The Jags might be feeling themselves a little bit after finally stringing together a W or two, but outside of that, you got a Green Bay Packers team that can continue to stack. I would say so.
Yeah, we spoke about this game on Monday, and the spread was 4.5, so it did move, against me. Listen, the Packers minus 6.5 on the alt spread is plus 134. The Jags are not a good team. That's what it comes down to. The Jags are not a good team. They spent the last 2 weeks in London. They did not take a bye. This is their first week home. We know what the Packers should do on offense. Listen, this is a Jordan Love game. I said it on Monday. The Jags are allowing 273 passing yards per game. Jordan Love's prop is sitting at 268. 258. I love the Packers in this game. And maybe I'm convincing myself too much of this. I'm going to be on the Packers minus, not just the 3.5. I'm going to be on the Packers minus 6.5. I truly believe the Packers are one of the best teams in the NFC. They have too many weapons on offense. And the Jags defense got destroyed by Drake May, a rookie, and Caleb Williams over the past 2 weeks in London. There's no reason that Jordan Love shouldn't be pushing towards 300 yards. The reasons that he wouldn't push for 300 yards is that Josh Jacobs runs for 150 yards on the ground and Trevor Lawrence throws a pick six, and then that means Jordan Love doesn't have to throw. But I still think the Packers minus 3.5 and the Packers on the alt spread minus 6.5 are some of my favorite plays, not just of this week, but probably the entire season.
Yeah, good point on that one. I think it should be all go Pack go for this, but yeah, and then also a good touch on the fact that this team did not choose to take a bye week upon return. I mean, they've been over in London for 2 whole weeks, and I can't imagine that'll work for everybody versus a team that wasn't performing well in the States whatsoever. So even though they were feeling better over across the pond, I don't know if they think that that's actually going to carry over into U.S. territory. Now we got the Falcons taking on the Bucks. This spread is sitting at 2.5, and as well as the total sitting at 45.5. This is going to be a really tough matchup for a number of reasons. In division is always causing a few sparks here, and we know that as for this weekend, at least the Bucks will be down their 2 top receivers, and Mike Evans as well as Chris Godwin at a loss for the season. We know some younger guys that can step up and get in the mix there. You're really good with pointing out secondary guys to get active and involved. So how do you start looking at this matchup between the Falcons and the Bucks?
It is, from the Bucs side of things, at least when I'm looking at the receiving, all of these lines have been adjusted, right? It's not like a surprise that, the Chris Godwin's out, Mike Evans out. It's not like some pop-up surprise. We know they're out. So Trey Palmer's at 40.5. Jalen McMillan's at 43.5, and Kate Allen's at 45.5. They're all super tight. It's not like we're getting one receiver down at 20 and we think he's going to smash just because he has an expanded role. The books know this. Kate Allen's my favorite. And I also think Kate Allen is going to score. He has yet to score a touchdown this season. We saw him, step up at the second half of last week's game when Mike Evans was out. I think this is a Kate Allen game. 45.5. We've seen him getting up the seam. Baker, I mean, is this the player that Baker has the most on-field connection with, dating back to last season? It probably is. So
Yeah,
Kate Allen's the guy that I'm going to be trusting. On the other side, Drake London's awesome. Kyle Pitts is continuing to have an emerging role. I'm worried about some of these secondary options because if Kyle Pitts hits the over. Drake London hits the over. Mooney hits the overs at 48.5. London's up at 63. Kyle Pitts at 44. If all these players are hitting the over, that means Kirk Cousins is hitting the over. And then instead of trying to pinpoint one player, you just roll with Kirk Cousins if we expect this game to be a bit of a shootout, which I'm not necessarily convinced on because, again, it is division. The Bucs, ultimately, the Bucs are so shorthanded, and I obviously, you as a Bucs fan, I hate to say this, but I don't think they want to turn this game into a shootout with a fully healthy Falcons team because they're shorthanded. So they want to slow the game down. This has to be a defensive game, and I think Kadon is the safest of the Bucs options.
Yeah, no, absolutely true. They're going to need this game to be slowed down. They're going to need to manage the clock immediately, which means, Tucker, Irving, their running back group is going to be probably leading the charge primarily, and then Cade Otton. I mean, we've seen his role expand over the past 3 weeks typically, so that reassurance is there for eating up the middle of the field and kind of getting those passes off. But outside of that, I think the running back room, as well as this defense has to pull it together. They've kind of left this team hang out to dry in a number of ways between injuries and just kind of blowing their tackles. But that's a spiel I can go on a whole nother day. Then we've got the Ravens versus the Browns. Now, spread sitting at 8.5, total sitting at 44.5. We know the Browns are down their QB1. I was shocked to see Winston as QB3 when they lost Watson and during the game and whatnot. Between all that mess, though, you got the Ravens coming off a pretty solid win themselves. So how do you even start finding some favorable bets and angles in this one?
So we've talked about the Browns a lot. I've said the Browns are terrible. Deshaun Watson is terrible. He's done for the season. Listen, Winston has it in the passing game, right? And a lot of people are really excited to see Winston take over as the quarterback for the Browns. So, and he's going to sling it, right? And that's kind of what he's always done when he's going out throwing for, all the yards and touchdowns when he was in Tampa. Like, he's going to throw picks, but he's still going to throw the yards. So if there's any time for the Browns to show a little bit of life, I think it's this week. So I kind of like the Browns 8.5 on the spread. Like I've always talked about, I don't really like laying heavy favorites. I think the Browns at 8.5 is the right play, and continuing to look to David Njoku to be that main target guy for the Browns. I would love to see a note as we close out the week on what we're going to be getting from Nick Chubb, because he had a very limited role in his first game back from significant leg injuries last week. So if we can get a note on he's going to see more carries, they're going to try and get him more involved, something from Kevin Stefanski, that would be important, because we did see the Ravens defense really susceptible to the run game last week against the Bucs. So if we get an expanded role for Nick Chubb, I think the Browns have a shot to certainly stay in a game, and cover the 8.5.
Very interesting. Not to mention, at least from my time with the Buccaneers, I can tell you, Jameis Winston loves to connect with his tight end. So I like the Njoku call big time, because that's where Cameron Brate's career came to life. Make sure you continue to roll with Tom and I here on Pro Football Today. It's the post-game show on SportsGrid TV. We got plenty of games to still roll through here on SportsGrid TV. Colts, Texans, Titans, Lions, Saints, Chargers, Bills, Seahawks, and so much more. Make sure you're following over at SportsGrid on X. But don't go anywhere. Tom and I have a quick break coming up here, and then we'll continue to roll through the Sunday slate here on SportsGrid.
Look, Aaron Rodgers, it does seem like he really enjoys, people like us, Vinny, talking about him.
I don't know what's going on here with Aaron Rodgers. I think there's some frustration settling in, and the Jets were not supposed to be this bad of a defense, right? They've had a lot of injuries. Maybe that's the thing here. Robert Saleh's influence is there. I know they have their defensive coordinator running things, but now he's distracted.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
Did they talk about the play they ran at the end of the game when it was the worst player screen I've ever seen in the history of basketball? No. See, here's what you got to do, Sherwood. I respect you. You're fantastic. But damn it, don't blame the officials. When you have a game like this that close, there's about 100 or 1,000 different things you could have done differently that could have won you the game.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Back at it with pro football today. It's the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio here on SportsGrid, running through the Sunday slate, circling some games and more with the odds and the lines and the best player prop bets to start angling before we get to Sunday. So we've rolled through a few games thus far. We left off talking about the Bengals versus the Browns. A good point out with Winston being in, potentially looking at Njoku. And look, I know the guy likes his tight ends. Let's move on to the Colts versus the Texans. This spread's sitting at 5.5 now. Some people are feeling like the demise of the Texans are starting to come into play. I think it's a little dramatic. 45.5 on the total, but what's your gauge when it comes to the Colts taking on the Texans territory?
This is a rematch of what we saw in week 1 where Joe Mixon ran for over 100 yards. And I think that's what we should be seeing, especially with Joe Mixon looking great, like back at full health. A couple weeks ago against the Pats, last week against the Packers. I also think this needs to be a big, not just a bounce back week, but like a confidence building week for CJ Stroud. 86 yards against the Packers, did not look good. Granted, the offensive line was an absolute mess in terms of pass protection for the Texans. If you were watching the game, you look at some type of recap or whatever it might be on Sunday night or Monday, you saw that the Texans offensive line was terrible. So this has to be a building game for the Texans. Yes, they still have a solid record. I think they should be winning this game. Whether they cover, I'm slightly unsure of. But this needs to be a game where the Texans show that they have one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. They have a running game. They can mix in Tank Dell. They can mix in Stephon Diggs. They can get Dalton Schultz involved if need be. They have to build and win this game. So I like the Texans to win. I don't necessarily like them to cover. I think Joe Mixon continues to have a big game. But CJ Stroud needs to be the key of this offense. And I'm not saying he needs to throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, but he needs to have a good game. And, the props aren't posted, but once they are, I'll have a whole lot of interest in Stroud's numbers.
Oh, beautiful. And I do think that's a good point, that this is a reset game for them because they had such a great trajectory going. Of course, you're going to have some games that throw you for a setback, but to see Stroud kind of have that bounce back moment, I'm very excited for that because I feel like he got stronger as the season went on last year. I think he can match that script and that pace with the weapons that he has thus far this season. Now we got the Bills taking on the Seahawks. You guys have heard me say it over and over and over again here on Pro Football Today. Seahawks can be a sneaky contender to go against, especially in the second half of any football game. Their defense came to life last week. So taking on the Bills, the spread is sitting at 3 at the moment. 47.5 on the total. What is this telling us, Tom?
3 seems a little bit light, and I kind of said the same thing about the Falcons last week going up against the Seahawks, so maybe I just don't have a good read on the Seahawks this season. But, the Bills are supposed to be one of the best teams. Now, granted, this is a road game for the Bills, but I still like the Bills. The big note for this game, the thing I'm most interested in is DK Metcalf not expected to play, which means we should see a big role not only for JSN, Jackson Smith, and Jake, but we should also be seeing Tyler Lockett continue to play, sort of that underneath role. So, JSN, it's a tough matchup going up against the Bills. There's no doubt about it. They have a good defense. They have a good secondary. But, again, if this is going to be a volume passing script game, Geno Smith is going to get there. And we spoke about, week 3, week 4, when we did the Lions game that Monday night. On paper, that's a tough matchup for Geno Smith, but he still gets to a ton of yards and a ton of attempts because if they're playing from behind, he's just going to get there. So yes, they're going to be without DK, and maybe that does shift them to just want to get Ken Walker involved out of the backfield, just continue to run the ball, and they don't want to turn it into a shootout versus the Bills because they're missing their best receiver. I could certainly see that happen, but I still think JSN needs to play a huge role in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've seen the way that Geno Smith tries to kind of clip at the heels of his opponent. Again, in that second half, if anybody's feeling frisky when it comes to those half bets, let's take a look when it comes to the Jets and the Patriots. Now, obviously, the Jets have that new acquisition, Davante Adams. We saw more, and I think he was a part of every snap of the offensive plays in his debut for the most part. With that being said, we know that the Jets need to string together a win here and find some consistency when it comes to their offensive attack, and they've got to match pace on the defensive side of the ball. Spread sitting at a 7, total sitting at 41.5, and I don't know why that total is just kind of geeking me out a little bit, Tom. So how do we start approaching this one? Because it should kind of be a blowaway for the Jets if they can string it all together.
You would like to think so if you are a Jets fan, but I don't know how some of these players don't go over. We have seen really suspect stuff from the Jets defense over the past few weeks. Drake May's line is at 208, and he threw for 274. Granted, it was against the Jags. We have to take that with a grain of salt. They're a bad defense. He also threw for 280 something, whatever it was, against the Texans when they lost that game. And his line's sitting at 208. So I'm interested in Drake May, which is, I don't think I've said that this year. Obviously, it's only been a few games for him, but I don't think I've said interest in any Pats players to this point in the season. Davante Adams' line is at 57.5, and his touchdown prop is sitting at plus 125. I normally don't like going to that plus 120-ish range, but they brought him in for a reason. He needs to, they need to build that on-field chemistry with Rodgers. They had so many years together in Green Bay. They need to get it back. He needs to score. He needs to hit the over on his yards just to kind of quell the fan base in terms of hey, things are okay. They may not be great, but at least they're okay for now, and we can beat a division rival with the rookie quarterback. So Drake May, Davante Adams, those are the players I like the most.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Also to add, with Davante Adams living with Aaron Rodgers at the moment because he doesn't want to invest in rent quite yet to make sure he's going to get the ball, and it's going to be a beneficial situation for him joining the Jets roster. So, I mean, what's the best way to keep a guy in town and make him lay down some rent? Find him in the end zone. I don't know. That's just something I'm going to go with. We got another quick break coming up here, but on the other side, maybe we touch on what could potentially take place between the Saints and the Chargers. I know that when we were chatting on Monday, you pointed out the clock management for the Chargers. That ended up just rolling through. So how are they going to maybe manipulate that versus the Saints with the 7.5 spread and a 40.5 on the total? We know the Saints are still kind of looking at a lot of second and third string guys in the mix to help pull them through. Then the Bears and the Commanders, where do we lean on that one? Well, we know that Jaden Daniels has that rib injury and potentially will not be involved, but there's still a number of weapons on this roster that can help this game be a close one, but the Bears should probably walk away. Regardless, we still have a handful of games to get to. We got one more rally here on Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey and Tom, and also want to follow us over at SportsGrid. That's on X, at SportsGrid TV over on Instagram for Instagram Lives from some of the hosts. So stick with us here on Pro Football Today, the post-game show. We'll catch you back on the other side of this quick break.
Look, Aaron Rodgers, it does seem like he really enjoys, people like us, Vinny, talking about him.
I don't know what's going on here with Aaron Rodgers. I think there's some frustration settling in, and the Jets were not supposed to be this bad of a defense, right? They've had a lot of injuries. Maybe that's the thing here. Robert Saleh's influence is there. I know they have their defensive coordinator running things, but now he's distracted.
Newswire, only on SportsGrid.
Did they talk about the play they ran at the end of the game when it was the worst player screen I've ever seen in the history of basketball? No. So here's what you got to do, Sherwood. I respect you. You're fantastic. But damn it, don't blame the officials. When you have a game like that close, there's about 100 or 1,000 different things you could have done differently that could have won you the game.
Betting above the rim. only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back into Pro Football Today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio running through the Sunday slate. So let's get right to it. Cardinals, Dolphins, 3.5 spread, 46.5 when it comes to the total. And I will tell you this, Friday of this previous week, Brady Cannon had it circled as a potentially more interesting game than given credit for. So Tom, where do you take this one?
We want to see final confirmation that Tyreek Hill will play. He popped up today with a foot injury on the injury report. Ultimately, the Dolphins still aren't that good, and this should be a James Conner game on the ground for the Cardinals. The offense for the Dolphins has just been a complete mess. I will say Marvin Harrison at plus 185 for a touchdown is certainly looking pretty good considering he's the number one receiving option on the Cardinals.
All right, Vinny's favorite team. We got the Saints taking on the Chargers, 7.5 on the spread, 40.5 when it comes to the total. How do we go against this one?
Chris Olave is back practicing after his concussion, so he is expected to play. It still should be Spencer Rattler for the Saints, and that doesn't mean good things for them. Alvin Kamara signed a 2-year extension, but he also came out and said that he's been playing with a fractured hand and some rib issues, which has me very, very concerned. This should be a get-right game for the Chargers, who do have a great defense, and we should continue to see their running game take the first foot of their team. It's not going to be Justin Herbert passing for over 300 yards as he did on the Monday night game against the Cardinals last week. It should be a run-first offense from the Chargers, so probably looking to whatever props for J.K. Dobbins. It's going to be a big game for him after a slow one last week.
All right. Bryce Young gets the tap to be the starting QB for the Carolina Panthers, taking on the Denver Broncos, 10.5 on the spread, 41.5 on the total. For this one, what do we got?
Like my first takeaway would be don't watch this game because it's going to be bad, but let's just quickly double check because this could be another big, so there's no props posted yet, but like it's going to be a Javonte Williams game. And I've said that before about him. The Panthers have a horrible run defense. It's absolutely terrible. We saw Brian Robinson last week for the Commanders take them apart. It's going to be a Javonte Williams week. Bryce Young, Bo Nix, quarterbacks I do not want to see. Just go to Javonte Williams. What is it, Denver, 10.5? I'm not laying 10.5 with Denver. I just don't think they're a great team, but the under is probably the best play out of anything.
Yeah, that's a pretty wicked spread coming in for that matchup. Then, as I alluded to before the break, we got the Bears taking on the Commanders. Obviously, banged up QB when it comes to the Commanders, so some switch up there, but plenty of targets. What do we see in this matchup?
You know, Marcus Mariota looked pretty good for the Commanders last week when he came into the game. When he came into the game again, it was against the Panthers. We have to take that with a grain of salt of like what we should be expecting from the Commanders, but they have a solid team overall. I think this game is about the under. Honestly, I think everyone wants to see Daniels play and see these two rookie quarterbacks going head to head. Ultimately, I don't think that's what we're going to be seeing unless there's some dramatic change between now and Sunday. But I think Caleb Williams continues to throw the ball at a high volume. I think both running games between Swift and Robinson continue to be involved. But I think under is probably the best way. Maybe the Commanders aren't as efficient as they were last week. It was kind of they played the Panthers last week, so they were overly efficient. Maybe they come crashing back down to earth against a good Bears defense.
I hear that one. Chiefs pick up a big acquisition, and I think you called this one here on SportsGrid that DeAndre Hopkins could be looking for a new home, and that is the case. He is now heading to KC to be a part of, well, hopefully a winning team. Chiefs taking on the Raiders this weekend, 9.5 on the spread, 41.5 on the total. Where do we start here?
There's no reason the Chiefs shouldn't be winning this. Should be winning this. Shouldn't be winning this game. Should not only be winning but covering is the point I'm making. Not just 9.5, but I have interest in them at minus 13.5. They'll win by 2 touchdowns. Dating back to training camp when the Raiders had some like social media gag with Kermit the Frog for the Pat Mahomes voice. He remembers that. He's going to go out and sling the ball with a new look offense, bring in DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know if I want to specifically go to DeAndre Hopkins, but I think the Chiefs put up 40 points.
Wow. And really quick, under a minute, 49ers, Cowboys, 4.5 spread, 47.5 on the total. Which way do we lean?
If there's any time for the Cowboys to win a game, it is against this immensely banged up 49ers roster. And if the Cowboys want to save their season, that's what it has to come down to. They have to be able to win this game.
There it is, the Sunday slate rundown, running through the Lions odds and all the things here on Pro Football Today. The post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Tom Vecchio, but most importantly, join me and Tom for the post-game show on Sunday Night Football, and then back for the pregame party next week on Monday. Plenty of great games, plenty of great coverage, all coverage here on SportsGrid TV. I hope you guys had a great Thursday night, and we'll catch you guys on Sunday.